Dear Muse, I keep thinking about all the progress goals I set, all the deadlines I never met. I try so hard to stay on track, but the moment I miss one day, even for reasons completely out of my control, it feels like I'm days behind, like I will never be able to catch up. And I know I'm supposed to take responsibility for my writing, but why does it feel like missing a deadline at work? I haven't written in months, and I feel guilty. Honestly, guilt sucks, but self guilt is a whole new level of ache. So before we get in, let's take a deep breath. Unclench your jaw, shake it out, roll your shoulders, and let them land where they want. All right, let's get right into it. Last episode, we talked about the pressure to be brilliant on the first page, how that pressure can freeze you before you even start, and how it can stop you from writing all the way through your first draft. One of the most frustrating parts of being human, but also one of the most fascinating, is how our emotions like to tangle themselves together. Now, I'm not saying that if you're feeling guilty for not writing, it's automatically because you're feeling pressured. Absolutely not. That's not the case. There are 100,000 reasons why guilt shows up. But for those of you who listened to episode 1 and thought, yep, that pressure is definitely me, and then immediately followed up with, oh, now I feel guilty for skipping my writing session today. That's normal. That's human. And yes, it's entirely possible the pressure and the guilt come from the same emotional root. It's also possible they come from two completely different places. So today, we're going to dive deeper into what guilt really is, where it comes from, why it feels so heavy, and how it affects the way you show up to your writing. Let's make something clear. Guilt isn't actually about writing. Guilt is about responsibility and the belief that you failed at it. Pressure freezes you from writing. Guilt punishes you for not writing it. Now, there are some writers who often use guilt like a motivator. If I feel bad enough, maybe will finally get back on track. I tried that technique. I tried it for several years. It was not a motivator. If anything, it drained me of all of my hopes and dreams. I was ashamed of my lack of success, and it led to my long term leave from writing. Tell me if any of these lines sound familiar. I should have written today. I wasted so much time not writing. If I really cared about writing, I wouldn't keep putting it off. Some writers can write a novel in a month. I can't even do it in a year. What is wrong with me? If this is you, you've made the guilt into a measure of how committed you are to your craft. When really the guilt is a measure of how hard you put on yourself. If you let yourself be consumed by guilt, it will only convince you that you failed and eventually push you to quit, leading guilt 1, you 0. Here's a question I want you to sit with. What expectation did you fail to meet? And who decided it was the correct one? Was it your goal? A deadline you set months ago when life looked different? Something you saw on social media? A standard you never once met but somehow expect yourself to magically achieve it? Some writers might not realize this, but guilt often comes from a place of comparison to an imaginary version of yourself. The self who writes every day, hits every word count, never procrastinates, never burns out, and never deals with outside responsibilities, exhaustion, or life in general. That version of you, the one who meets that high expectation, they are as fictional as your character. So why are you punishing yourself for not being them? Let's peel back an onion layer. Your guilt was never about missing a writing session. Most of the time, it comes from deeper emotional patterns you've carried for years. A callback to pressure to be good or productive. If your worth has ever been tied to achievements or high performances, guilt becomes your default emotional response when you feel you're not achieving it. Fear of disappointing yourself. You believe that skipping a writing day means you're giving up on your dream. Then there's fear of disappointing others. They've set life goals when you're successful, and if you can't achieve it, you're failing their dreams. Punishment based motivation from your childhood. If mistakes or failures were met with consequences, emotional or otherwise, guilt becomes your inner alarm system. Believing productivity equals worth. If you didn't produce something, you feel like you failed. And seeing writing as something you must earn, as if rest disqualifies you from being a real writer. You don't feel guilty because you did something wrong. You feel guilty because you care so deeply about your writing that not doing it feels like abandonment. You are shaming yourself into caring more. But you already care. You've always cared. Your passion for stories already proves that. And that is why it hurts so much more than if you miss a deadline from work. For me, guilt was a mixture of two things: a fear of disappointing the people I loved, and a lifetime of punishment based motivation. I grew up with family members who were massive supporters of my dreams. So supportive, in fact, that they built entire futures around the idea of my success. They were convinced that I'd become a millionaire. They dreamed of bigger homes, early retirement, being debt free, and all of it hinged on me making it as a writer. And here's the thing: I know they meant well. They were excited for me. They believed in me. And I love and I appreciated it so much. But I was a kid. I was a teenager. A teenager who already lived with the weight of punishment based motivation. I was terrified of disappointing the people who believed in me. And at the same time, I had real life happening. I had school, I had homework, I had chores, I had a part time job, exams were approaching, university applications were looming. I had one parent who believed in the success of my writing. The other wanted me to pick a major, pick a career, pick a future because writing was a hobby, not a career. So when I finally did have a sliver of time for myself, I watched TV. I was mentally exhausted. I was physically exhausted. I was emotionally drained, and I punished myself for it because the only energy that I had was to lose myself into watching TV instead of sitting down to write. And when I did sit down to write, the pressure hit me, and I couldn't do it. Guilt doesn't make you write better. It makes writing emotionally heavier. And when writing feels heavy, you avoid it more, which increases guilt, which increases the pressure, and suddenly you're stuck in a loop. So, how can we reframe the guilt for not writing? You don't owe your writing consistency, you owe your writing honesty. Consistency grows from your compassion. You are not a machine. You are not AI who can spit 100 thousands of stories in a minute. You are a person, a human, someone with a story to tell, but who also has a life, who has responsibilities, exhaustion, emotional wounds, and a brain that sometimes just needs to watch comfort shows instead of being creative. You're allowed to not write. You're allowed to rest. You are allowed to shift your priorities and focus what you deemed as most important. Here are a few grounding sentences to counter that guilt. My rest is important. My dream isn't less important because I took a break for myself. I can return to my story when I'm ready to write it. Guilt doesn't determine my worth as a writer. If you are a fan of journaling, and as a writer, I hope you do a little bit of journaling because it can be a great tool for your stories. The reflection question of the week is: what expectation is my guilt holding me accountable to? And do I agree with it? Don't analyze it, just write it down and be as honest as you can. A writer's guilt is heavy, but it doesn't mean you fail. It means you care about your craft. It means your story matters to you. You don't need to punish yourself into making progress with your writing. You don't need to earn the right to be a writer. And you certainly don't have to apologize to yourself for not writing. All you need to do is return to your story when you can, when you are ready, without shame. You're doing better than you think. And we'll take this one breath, one word, and one draft at a time. And hey, if you ever need a good vent about the writing process, you can catch me with my bestie Kayla over on Writing Sucks, but I Love It. This was Dear Muse. And if you're struggling to write, just put a comment down below with the tag hashtag Dear Muse, and maybe your question will become a future episode. Or buy a new notebook.